If you were forced to wait endlessly for someone who might never return, how long would your loyalty last? Prepare yourself for a heart-wrenching tale of devotion, perseverance, and the unbreakable bond between a dog and his human that will leave you reaching for tissues and questioning the depth of your own relationships. In the bustling Grand Central Terminal of New York City, where thousands of people rush past each other daily without a second glance, a small brown terrier mix sat unmoving beside a wooden bench in the main concourse. His fur was slightly matted, his eyes tired yet alert, scanning each passing face with a hope that never dimmed, even as hours turned into an entire day. The dog's name was Max, a 7-year-old rescue who had been adopted 5 years earlier by James Wilson, a 68-year-old retired high school teacher who lived alone in his modest apartment in the Bronx. James had found Max at a shelter, trembling in the corner of his kennel, unwanted and afraid after being abandoned by his previous family. What drew James to Max wasn't his appearance or breed. It was the way the dog's eyes lit up when James spoke to him, as if he understood every word and had been waiting his entire life for someone who would simply talk to him like he mattered. Their connection was immediate and profound, two souls who had experienced loss, finding unexpected companionship in each other. Over the years, Max had become James's closest companion, accompanying him on his daily walks to the local park, sitting patiently outside the grocery store and curling up at the foot of his bed each night. Max wasn't just a pet, he was family, the only family James had left after his wife passed away nearly a decade ago. The morning had started like any other. James had taken Max for their usual walk, stopping at their favorite coffee shop, where the baristas always kept a dog treat behind the counter just for Max. They had returned home, and James had prepared for his monthly doctor's appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital, a routine checkup for his heart condition. James had never liked leaving Max alone, even for a few hours, so he often took him on the subway when he had appointments. Max was well behaved on public transportation, sitting quietly at James's feet, occasionally gaining smiles from other passengers who noticed his gentle demeanor and attentive eyes that never left James's face. That day, they had arrived at Grand Central Terminal to transfer trains when James began to feel unwell. The pain in his chest had started subtly, a tightness he tried to ignore as they walked through the crowded terminal. He had stopped at a bench, setting down Max's leash for just a moment while he reached for his medication in his coat pocket. Max had sensed something was wrong, whining softly and pressing his nose against James's hand, but before James could reassure him, the pain had intensified dramatically. In his final conscious moment, James had whispered to Max, "Stay," the command they had practiced countless times, never imagining it would be the last word he would ever say to his faithful companion. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they found James unconscious and quickly transported him to the nearest hospital, not noticing the small dog who had obediently stayed exactly where he had been told, watching with confused eyes as his human was carried away through the crowd. And there Max remained, following his last command with unwavering dedication. Hour after hour passed as Max sat beside the bench, his leash trailing on the floor beside him. Occasionally he would stand, stretch his legs and circle the area, but he never ventured far from the spot where James had left him. Some passers-by tossed him scraps of food or offered water, but most rushed by without a second glance, too consumed by their own destinations to notice the dog whose world had suddenly stopped turning. As evening approached, a few station workers had noticed Max, but assumed he was with one of the many travelers passing through. No one realized that the person he belonged to wasn't coming back, that Max was waiting for a reunion that would never happen. And so, as the terminal grew quieter with the passing hours, Max remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on each new face that entered. By the following morning, Max had been waiting for almost 24 hours. His fur was dusty from the terminal floor, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet he maintained his post with remarkable determination. A few commuters had tried to approach him, but Max would back away cautiously, unwilling to abandon his post or the promise he had made to wait. It was during the morning rush hour that Sarah Chen, a 34-year-old pediatric nurse ending her night shift, noticed the small dog sitting alone. Unlike others who had passed by, she stopped, observing how Max's eyes tracked each passing traveler before returning to a state of patient vigilance that seemed to hold a profound sadness. Sarah had always been drawn to animals in distress. It was what had led her to volunteer at animal shelters on her days off from the hospital. Something about Max's demeanor spoke to her, and as she approached slowly, she could see the wear of time on him, the slightly matted fur, the tired posture that straightened whenever someone walked nearby, as if hope was an instinct he couldn't suppress. Sarah approached Max cautiously, crouching down several feet away and speaking softly to him. "Hey there, buddy. Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, noticing how the dog's ears perked up at her voice, but his eyes continued to scan the crowd as if her presence was merely a temporary distraction from his more important mission. Unlike others who had tried to coax Max away, Sarah didn't immediately reach for him or try to grab his leash. Instead, she sat down on the floor nearby, respecting his space while offering a gentle presence that seemed to slightly ease the tension in the dog's small body. Years of working with frightened children had taught her patience, and she applied the same principles now. After nearly 30 minutes of sitting quietly nearby, occasionally speaking to Max in soothing tones, Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen before: a small round tag hanging from his collar, partially obscured by his matted fur. If she could just get close enough to read it, perhaps she could figure out who this dog belonged to and why he had been left alone for so long. The station was becoming increasingly crowded as the morning rush hour intensified, and Sarah worried that someone might accidentally step on Max or that animal control might be called to remove him. She had to gain his trust quickly, but every time she inched closer, Max would back away slightly, maintaining the exact same distance between them. "He's waiting for someone," a janitor commented as he swept nearby, noticing Sarah's gentle attempts to approach the dog. "Been here since yesterday morning. Poor thing hasn't left that spot except to circle around a bit. Never seen a dog so determined to stay put. Someone must have told him to wait." The janitor's words sent a chill down Sarah's spine as she realized what might have happened. Max's owner could have fallen ill or had an emergency, leaving the dog behind unintentionally. The thought that Max had been faithfully waiting for nearly 24 hours, confused and alone in the bustling terminal, made her heart ache with both admiration and concern. Sarah decided to try a different approach. She reached into her bag and pulled out the sandwich she had packed for her commute home. Carefully unwrapping it, she placed a small piece of turkey on the floor between them, then slid it toward Max with a gentle push. "It's okay," she said softly. "I just want to help you find your person." Max looked at the food, then back at the terminal entrance as if weighing his hunger against his duty. After a moment's hesitation, he cautiously stretched forward, keeping his back legs firmly in place as he snatched the turkey and retreated again. It wasn't much, but it was the first connection they had made. Over the next hour, Sarah patiently earned Max's trust, one tiny piece of turkey at a time, each offering bringing her fingers a little closer to the exhausted dog. Station workers passing by would smile at the scene, the young woman in scrubs sitting cross-legged on the dirty terminal floor, speaking softly to a dog who was gradually allowing her presence in his lonely vigil. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of patient coaxing, Max allowed Sarah to gently stroke his head. His fur was rough with city grime, but he leaned slightly into her touch, a barely perceptible relaxation that spoke volumes about his exhaustion and loneliness. With slow, deliberate movements, Sarah reached for his collar tag. The tag was simple, a round silver disc with a name and phone number etched into the metal. "Max," Sarah read aloud, and the dog's ears perked up at the sound of his name. "Good boy, Max. You're such a good boy." As she turned the tag over, she noticed something else engraved on the back. "I'm Max. If I'm alone, please call my dad. He needs me." With trembling fingers, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the number on Max's tag. Her heart pounded as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times with no answer. Just as she was about to hang up, someone answered, not James, but a woman's professional voice. "Mount Sinai Hospital, how may I direct your call?" Confused, Sarah explained that she had found a dog with this phone number on his tag. There was a pause on the line, then the receptionist asked her to hold. Several minutes passed before another voice came on the line, a social worker named Rebecca, who explained that the number belonged to James Wilson, a patient who had been brought in yesterday after suffering a severe heart attack at Grand Central Terminal. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Max had been waiting all this time for an owner who couldn't return, According to Rebecca, James had been unconscious since his arrival and had no family listed in his emergency contacts. The hospital had no idea that his dog had been left behind, faithfully following his last command to stay put. Would it be possible, Sarah asked with a sudden determination that surprised even herself, if I brought Max to the hospital? If James is unconscious, maybe having his dog nearby could help. It was a long shot, and she knew hospitals had strict policies about animals, but the thought of separating Max from James after such extraordinary loyalty seemed unbearably cruel. To Sarah's surprise, Rebecca didn't immediately refuse. Actually, she said slowly, James regained consciousness briefly this morning. He was distressed and kept asking about Max. The doctors had to sedate him because his heart rate was dangerously elevated. Let me speak with the attending physician. This might actually help his recovery. While she waited for Rebecca to confer with the doctor, Sarah gently stroked Max's head, marveling at the depth of his devotion. "Your dad is alive, Max," she whispered, her voice catching. "He's sick, but he's alive and he's asking for you." At her words, Max's tail gave a small, tentative wag, the first sign of happiness she had seen from him. When Rebecca returned to the phone, her news was both hopeful and heartbreaking. The doctor had approved a brief visit, recognizing that reducing the patient's anxiety was critical to his recovery. However, James's condition was extremely serious. The heart attack had been massive, and the prognosis was guarded at best. They couldn't guarantee he would even be conscious when Max arrived. Sarah didn't hesitate. "We're coming," she said firmly, ending the call and carefully attaching her scarf to Max's leash as a more comfortable makeshift handle. As she prepared to guide him toward the exit, she worried he might resist leaving his post, but to her surprise, Max stood readily, as if he somehow understood that she was taking him to James. The subway ride to Mount Sinai Hospital was tense, with Max sitting rigidly against Sarah's legs, his eyes darting nervously at the unfamiliar route. Sarah kept reassuring him, one hand resting gently on his back as the train rocked them uptown. "You've waited so patiently," she told him. "Now it's time to see your dad." At the hospital entrance, Rebecca was waiting for them, her eyes widening at the sight of Max. Exhausted, dirty, but intensely alert, his nose already raised as if searching for a familiar scent among the antiseptic hospital smells. "I can't believe he waited all this time," she murmured, bending down to let Max sniff her hand before leading them through a side entrance to avoid the main lobby. They took a service elevator to the cardiac intensive care unit, where Rebecca briefed them on what to expect. James had been unconscious again since early morning, his condition unstable. The doctors had approved only a brief visit, and Max would need to be calm. Any agitation could be dangerous for James in his fragile state. As they approached the room, Max's demeanor changed dramatically. His posture straightened, his nose worked frantically, and a small whine escaped him. Somehow he knew they were getting closer to James. The tiny sound, the first vocalization Sarah had heard from him, contained such longing that tears sprang to her eyes. James lay still in the hospital bed, his face pale beneath an oxygen mask, various machines monitoring his vital signs with steady beeps and glowing numbers. Rebecca spoke quietly with the nurse on duty, while Sarah knelt beside Max at the doorway, giving him a moment to process the scene before they entered. "Go slowly," Sarah whispered, but Max needed no guidance. With deliberate care, he approached the bed, his steps almost ceremonial, his eyes never leaving James's face. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor as Max reached the bedside and gently rested his chin on the edge of the mattress, looking up at his human with unwavering devotion. For several breathless moments, nothing happened. James remained still, unaware of the miracle of loyalty that had found its way to him against all odds. Then, as if responding to some unheard call, Max lifted his paw and placed it gently on James's hand. The same signal he had used countless times over the years when he wanted his human's attention. The touch seemed to penetrate James's unconsciousness, where medical intervention had failed. His fingers twitched slightly beneath Max's paw, and the heart monitor registered a subtle change in rhythm. Rebecca and the nurse exchanged meaningful glances as James's eyelids began to flutter, fighting against the heavy sedation. Then, in a moment that would forever alter the lives of everyone in that room, James's eyes opened, confused and unfocused at first, then widening with recognition as they fell upon Max. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice barely audible behind the oxygen mask, tears immediately welling in his eyes as he weakly raised a hand to touch Max's fur. "He waited at the exact spot where you left him," Sarah explained, her own voice choked with emotion. "For over 24 hours he never left. The tag on his collar is how I found you." As she spoke, Max pressed closer to the bed, his entire body trembling with the relief of reunion, his tail moving in a slow, joyful rhythm. The doctors were astonished by the immediate improvement in James's vital signs following Max's visit. What medical science had struggled to achieve, the presence of his devoted companion had accomplished in minutes, giving James a reason to fight, a tangible reminder of the love waiting for him to recover. Though Max had to leave after that initial visit, hospital regulations couldn't be bent indefinitely. The brief reunion had sparked something crucial in James. The medical team noted a marked change in his responsiveness to treatment, as if his body had remembered its purpose was to heal, to return to the loyal friend who had waited so faithfully for him. Sarah found herself unable to simply walk away from the situation. She had planned to take Max to a shelter until James recovered, but standing in the hospital corridor with the dog looking up at her with tired but trusting eyes, she made a different choice. "Would it be okay," she asked Rebecca, "if I took him home with me until James is better?" Rebecca agreed readily, providing Sarah with the necessary paperwork to temporarily care for Max and promising to keep her updated on James's condition. As they left the hospital, Sarah realized that her life had irrevocably changed from the moment she had noticed the small dog waiting in Grand Central Terminal. Some connections, once made, were impossible to sever. The first few days were challenging as Max adjusted to Sarah's apartment. He would sit by the door for hours, looking up expectantly whenever footsteps passed in the hallway, his hope for James's return never diminishing. At night, he slept on Sarah's bathroom floor, the cool tiles perhaps reminding him of the terminal floor where he had maintained his vigil. Sarah visited James daily, bringing updates and occasionally small video clips of Max to show him on her phone. Each snippet of Max sleeping peacefully or cautiously exploring the park near her apartment seemed to energize James, giving him tangible goals for recovery, to walk Max in that park, to feel the leash in his hand again, to return to their shared life. 2 weeks after his heart attack, James was finally strong enough to sit up in a chair beside his bed. The doctors, impressed by his determination, had begun discussing discharge plans, though they emphasized he would need significant support during his recovery. James listened to their concerns with a patience he didn't feel. His only thought was returning to Max. "I live alone," he admitted to Sarah during one of her visits. "I don't have family to help with my recovery. The doctors won't discharge me unless I have support at home." The worry in his voice was palpable, not for himself, but for how much longer Max would have to wait for their life to resume, for how much longer they would be separated. Sarah had anticipated this concern. In the weeks of caring for Max, taking him for gentle walks, watching him slowly regain his spirits while maintaining his fundamental loyalty to James, she had been formulating a plan. "What if," she suggested carefully, "you stayed with me for a while? My apartment has a spare room and Max is already comfortable there." James's eyes filled with tears at the offer, this kindness from a stranger who had become connected to them through an act of extraordinary compassion. "Why would you do this for us?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You've already done so much, taking care of Max, visiting me. You've put your life on hold for people you didn't even know." Sarah thought about how to explain the inexplicable bond that had formed between them. "Max taught me something about loyalty," she finally said. "Watching him wait for you, seeing how much you mean to each other, it made me realize what matters. My life isn't on hold. It just expanded to include both of you for a while." The day James was discharged from the hospital was emotional for everyone involved. The medical staff who had witnessed Max's first visit gathered to say goodbye, many of them misty-eyed at the story that had spread throughout the hospital. The dog who had waited, the nurse who had connected them, the healing power of devotion that had defied medical expectations. As they entered Sarah's apartment, Max's reaction was everything they had hoped for. Pure, unbridled joy expressed in gentle jumps and soft whines as he circled James's legs, pressing against him as if to reassure himself that this reunion was real and permanent. James, still weak but improving daily, sank to his knees to embrace his faithful companion. "I'm sorry I made you wait," James whispered into Max's fur, tears streaming down his face. "You're the best boy in the world. You did exactly what I asked. You stayed." Max responded by gently licking James's face, his entire body wiggling with happiness, the weeks of separation forgotten in the joy of being together again. In the days that followed, Sarah watched as James and Max settled into their temporary home, their bond somehow even stronger than before. Max rarely left James's side, seemingly understanding his human's fragility, adapting his usual energetic behavior to match James's slower pace, as if he had appointed himself personal guardian during recovery. James improved rapidly in Max's constant company, his determination to regain independence fueled by his desire to properly care for his dog again. The physical therapist who visited commented that James worked harder than most patients twice his age, pushing through discomfort with a resilience that could only come from profound motivation. 6 weeks after the heart attack, James was strong enough to take Max for short walks around the neighborhood, their progress monitored from a respectful distance by Sarah. Watching them together, the careful way James held the leash, the attentive manner in which Max adjusted his pace to match his human's, she felt a bittersweet pride in their journey. "I've been thinking," James said one evening as they shared dinner, Max contentedly dozing at their feet. "My apartment lease is ending next month. I've been in the same place for 20 years, but maybe it's time for a change. Somewhere closer to the park, on the first floor, so there are fewer stairs. Somewhere closer to here." The implication hung in the air between them, that what had begun as an emergency arrangement had grown into something more significant. Sarah and James had developed a friendship that defied conventional boundaries, united by their shared love for Max and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Sarah replied, understanding all that remained unspoken. The three of them had created something unexpected, a family formed not by blood or obligation, but by choice, by recognition of the rare and precious connection they shared, a connection that had begun with a dog's unwavering loyalty. The following weekend, they returned to Grand Central Terminal together, not to catch a train but to visit the spot where Max had maintained his vigil. James stood silently by the bench, imagining his faithful companion waiting hour after hour, holding on to the hope of reunion even when all logical reason for hope had disappeared. A station worker who recognized Max approached them, amazed to see the dog returned with his owner. "We've been telling your story," she said, gesturing to her colleagues nearby, "about the dog who waited and the nurse who helped him. It's changed how we see things here. Now we notice the quiet dedication that might otherwise be overlooked." James knelt carefully and embraced Max, overwhelmed by the thought of what might have happened if Sarah hadn't noticed him that morning, if she hadn't been the kind of person who would stop when others walked by. "Thank you," he whispered to Max, but his eyes met Sarah's, the gratitude extending to her equally faithful vigil. As they prepared to leave, a young woman approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, "but are you the people from the story? About the dog who waited at the station?" When they nodded, she continued, "I just wanted to say, I adopted a shelter dog yesterday because of your story. I realized what we can learn from them about loyalty and love." That moment crystallized something James had been feeling since his recovery began, that Max's extraordinary act of devotion had created ripples beyond their immediate lives, touching strangers in ways they would never fully know. Their private story had somehow become a public reminder of the depth of connection possible between beings who choose each other. On their way home, walking slowly but steadily through the park with Max trotting contentedly between them, James reflected on the fragility of life and the unexpected strength found in vulnerability. His heart attack had nearly ended everything, but instead had opened a door to a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Sarah watched James and Max together, marveling at how completely her life had transformed from that fateful morning in Grand Central Terminal. She had always valued her independence, her carefully constructed routine, yet had willingly dismantled it all for a dog she didn't know and a man she had never met, and in doing so had found a fuller version of herself. Max, unaware of his role as hero and catalyst, simply enjoyed the present moment, the familiar hand holding his leash, the new friend walking beside them, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. His world had expanded, but its center remained unchanged. Loyalty given freely, love returned in equal measure, and the promise kept between a man and his dog.